Can your coworkers truly be your friends? We've talked about this for quite some time, but have you ever been in a situation where possibly you got a promotion? Maybe you all of a sudden you became somebody else's boss and yesterday you were their buddy. And of course you guys talked and had some great laughs. But often that can truly change a relationship. And I've personally experienced this, I've seen this, and quite often becoming somebody's boss or getting that promotion can drastically change the way you look at each other. Now, welcome back to the hustle, everybody, and welcome back to the grind. And thanks for joining in today again, and thanks for joining in again today. And I just want to comment on a response. I had a viewer named Vincent reach out and commented about how his experience and how his work relationship drastically changed. How he got a job interview for an escalation, for a job improvement or a job increase or a promotion, as it were. And then as soon as that happened, it came to fruition, all of those coworkers turned on him. Now, we know this is a common phenomenon. This is something that's very common, actually. As a matter of fact, in many cases, it's pretty easy to see why that can be. A lot of times, people believe that your friends for life, your buddies, hanging out, go to the bar, at the end of the day, maybe hang out, have a couple of drinks, some great windshield talk things about all kinds of other things going on at work, or maybe coworkers or upcoming events within the workspace. And quite often sharing these stories, sharing these moments between coworkers and peers are usually based along being a lot more candid, open-minded, open-lipped. And quite often people say things that they wouldn't say to their boss. This is not uncommon. We all have those moments, right? How you're working away, whether you're working a trades job, or it doesn't matter whether you're working in an office environment, they're all kind of the same policies apply. You could be working along and chatting maybe with your peers, or chitter chatter, and maybe there's some water cooler talk, and next thing you know, the boss comes walking around the corner. Oh, hi, John. Oh, hi, Vern. And then like, oh, hi. And all of a sudden there's this sort of awkward silence. The conversation flips, and no longer do you continue on that chit chat. There's an absolutely interesting way the dynamic changes. When the boss is in the room, your supervisor, your manager, your director, all of a sudden there's a shift. There's some sort of a tidal shift of an artificial response, I would call that, more than anything, an artificial reaction that represents from the outside, from the shell, looking in, as a form of respect. But let's be honest, the vast majority of people I've ever seen or ever met act like that. They act like they respect their managers, their supervisors. And in some cases they do. A lot of great supervisors and managers exist out there. But that usually comes with time. And like they say, things like respect is earned. It's not given. So you have to earn it. As a great supervisor, as a great leader, those are traits that are hard to come by today. In today's day and age, everybody, the worker, like you, like I, like whoever, when we go through our lives, in our jobs, we just realize that there's a certain element of respect and a certain distance that you give to said coworkers or to your boss, your supervisor. And there's this sort of isolation and this level of, you can let in so much, but maybe not in its entirety. The point of sharing too much is often something that we often have to debate and discuss whether it's something we want to get involved with. Rather, it's easier just to have light duty chit chat with that supervisor. That way it doesn't bite us in the rump later on. But what I can actually see is what happens in those circumstances, like Vincent said, where you have a scenario that all of a sudden that dynamic shifts. It really does open the eyes to who your real friends are. Coworkers. Morning. Those coworkers of yours that, maybe you're chit-chatting. Maybe you're having those great conversations with. Maybe you were talking smack about the boss. Whatever it be. See, the problem becomes things are said, so things are done. There's different actions. Maybe there's work ethic that everybody knows because the boss doesn't always see how everybody works. We know how that goes, right? As soon as the boss comes around, the white hard hat, or the boss, so to speak, comes around, all of a sudden everybody looks busy. Hey everybody, the boss is coming, get busy. So this is not uncommon. And so quite often the supervisor, the manager, the boss doesn't always have that perspective. They don't always see what everybody else sees. They don't see the day-to-day. Years ago when I think back in the trade, many years ago, many years ago, when I was taking an apprenticeship for electrician, and I remember I was on this job. And I was on this job where we were building this facility, north side of Edmonton, the army base, the garrison. They were building some facilities there, and there was, a whole bunch of buildings. It was like a mega project. There was a bunch of different work going on, and there was probably 500, maybe 1,000 probably about 1,000 workers on site. We probably had about 30, 40 electricians. And I remember that job. And everybody's got their tasks, everybody's got their scope, and apprentices know their role. They're there kind of doing simple work, learning. You get third, fourth years, they're starting to take more independent work. The journeymen are usually leading the show. And it's the foremen and the superintendents are usually stuck in the trailer, for the 90% of the day. Well, there's this one guy that I saw. You'd start out with a pre-job in the morning. It's a bit of a tailgate meeting, so to speak. And the supervisor was out there and everybody's just chatting it up and having a good old time. But then, of course, everybody's, it's time to get the brass tacks. Boss leaves. Everybody assumes they've got their job. There's this one guy, and it turns out he got laid off early because it's not a real shocker. As soon as everybody's off scattering, so the supervisor leaves, the tailboard is done, and everybody sort of kind of starts on their day. Some people going to grab their tools, some grabbing some material, some are planning their work. And this one guy, how many times I saw him, he was working up on this sort of mezzanine area that didn't have the final. There was supposed to be a final set of stairs installed, but they had to put a temporary ladder up there to get up there. And it was funny because as soon as the job broke, everybody's dispersing. This gentleman would climb up the mezzanine, pull the ladder up to the top, and then lo and behold, he would just disappear and you wouldn't see him for hours on end. Well, everybody knew, and they're like hollering, and you couldn't see him because you'd have to look up above. And this guy was always doing this every single day, day in, day out. He started hiding, he wasn't doing his work. And then other workers were having to kind of fill in and get some of that job done because some people would run out of work, then they'd be looking for other things. So they'd start backfilling and tackling some of the things that he had to do. So he sort of he slotted himself in very nicely. He fit into a space where in those types of environments, often the rest of the team picks up the slack. And a lot of you can probably appreciate that. When you're in a big team environment, it's like a hockey team. Think about that. I think of teams like, I don't want to even say it, but I won't say any names specifically, but think of a hockey team. You've got a bunch of players and they're skating around. You've got 5 skaters and a goaltender, and they're all wheeling around. And you've got 3 lines, and there's lots of different chances for scoring and getting scored against. So there's lots of effort, and it takes a team to make a game. But what ends up happening, you get a player maybe has a down game, or maybe a player just doesn't necessarily carry his own weight. The beauty is the rest of the team can sometimes pick up that slack, work around him. Of course, he rotates out, next shift comes in. You didn't even know he had a terrible shift. Now we know professional sports, we watch them like a hawk, and so sometimes there's a lot of critics. But let's face it, team sports, just like the trades, or a lot of other team environments, people can blend into the woodwork and actually not worry too much about it. The problem is when it becomes solo. If you're a solo artist, think of an arm wrestler, think of a triathlete, think of a lot of these sports where it's you, and you. And if you don't perform, you don't win. See, that's the thing. When you're in a team environment, so many people are able to sort of blend into the woodwork. And if you're a solo artist, if you're professional and it's you, yourself, and I, it stands out pretty quickly when you're not holding up your end of the bargain. But this happens in the workspace. And this goes back to this conversation about whether some of these folks can continue being your friends as soon as you get to become a supervisor, or you take some kind of big promotion like Vincent was speaking of. And all of a sudden things change. They do change. But here's the thing, they don't need to change. See, because I've always believed, and I've seen it in my own workspace, those people that show up day in, day out, tirelessly, they work their job, they're willing to help out wherever they can in other ways once they've done tackling their work. And, we see that. I mean, the corporations these days have that expectation now, of course, of doing more with less. So it's really not the focus on that, but it's really more about helping your peers, helping the teammates, if you will, because that's ultimately what gets the task accomplished. And so it's not about the organization, because at the end of the day, here's the thing, that task has to be done one way or the other, with or without you. And so the idea of teams sticking together to help each other is a big one. But what happens is when you get that promotion, you quite often start to figure out who wasn't helping in that team. Who was that consistent defenseman that constantly letting the skaters get around them? Who was that person that was putting up the front? Who was that person that pushing back and didn't want to do the extra to help out? Who was that person that was talking smack? Who was that person that was talking all kinds of rhetoric and not, being quite toxic? Who was that person? Well, we all know that person. You have one in your workplace if you've worked there, if you have a job, or if you did have a job. We all know that person. And it's that person, unfortunately, is now singled out. See, because if a person operates with the premise of integrity, respect, it doesn't matter if you're a supervisor, or a manager, or a peer, or a coworker. At the end of the day, what ends up happening is everybody realizes that, yes, this person's doing their task, they're doing their role, they're working hard, they're being essentially a team player. And it's really more about the team player than it is about dishing out and, obviously helping the corporation, because let's be honest, that's just a big money-making machine. But it's not about that. Let's face it, in today's day and age, there's no shortage of companies looking to, change, get rid of workers, downsize, AI. All these shift in these organizations mean that the possibility of getting removed from your job is much greater than it's ever been. And so if you're part of a team, the idea of isn't necessarily, becoming me, myself, and I, but as a team, if everybody looks good, everybody succeeds. And that's the way they pitch it. But let's be honest, we all know who the slackers and those who aren't. So once you become that supervisor, that manager, that leader position, the person that wasn't helping out, wasn't helping their peers, was actually laying more on their coworkers, that person now becomes very vulnerable, because that person on the inside now is on the outside. They are now a person of some level of authority. And so I've personally seen this, I've witnessed this myself. And as to Vincent's point right there, Vincent made a great point, because it does change. It doesn't need to. And I've been in circumstances where I took on leadership roles where I had peers one day, and the next day I knew that person, and it was almost insider information that you almost didn't want to have. It's tough, because you have to now isolate yourself and say, look, we're going to start from scratch. We're going to start to build this relationship in a different way. But those that work, help out, people that not even so much about taking on more work, because let's face it, AI and all of these other things will do our work for us. It's a tragic scenario we're in today, but that's just this is the shift in the workspace. Things are changing, and changing very rapidly. The bigger thing here is, the bigger conversation is, are they operating with that respect? Do they respect their coworkers? Do they respect you as a peer? Likely they're going to respect you later on as well. See, the idea is, it's all about respect. It's all about operating with a level of integrity. And if they operate in that premise, and that's the type of person that they are, there's a good possibility that relationship doesn't even need to change. And we've spoken about this before. We know that coworkers are not your friends anyhow. So a lot of this is really for naught, because realistically, Most people are willing to pull a rug out from under you at the drop of a hat. And so it doesn't really matter all that much, other than the fact that there have been cases where there were truly friends and they were hanging out on the weekends and they had those common factors and they had those things they like to do. But then, lo and behold, this type of dynamic shift happens. Next thing you know, the friendship goes away. It's a potentially vulnerable situation a lot of people find themselves in. And that's why, in fact, to Vincent's point, it does change. Your coworkers, when there's a job change, when there's a title change, it really can impact the outcome. Anyway, I'd like to hear your thoughts down below, everybody. Another great conversation. Beautiful day. Oh, lovely. Wearing my dad's shirt proudly of 4 amazing kids. That's just perfect. Living the best dream, living the best life. Please do subscribe to the channel if you love this kind of content, talking about lifestyle, retirement, and just living your best life. Hope to see each and every one of you real soon, everybody. Bye-bye.